Did you know over 600,000 people visit a house in Memphis, Tennessee every year? It's not the home of a president or a war hero. It's Graceland, the home of Elvis Presley. He bought it in 1957 for about $100,000. He was 22 years old. He died there 20 years later. But the house didn't die. It became something else. A shrine, a museum, a symbol. But a symbol of what? Is it just a monument to a rock star? Or is it something more? Why do people from all over the world feel a need to walk through its rooms, to stand by its swimming pool, to be silent at its grave? The house itself is a strange mix. A colonial style front, a wild green shag carpeted jungle room in the back. It's a place of contradictions. It's a home that feels like a public stage. It's a private space that is now one of the most public places in America. It's a symbol of immense success and profound tragedy. We think we know Graceland. We've seen the pictures of the music gates. We've heard about the fried peanut butter and banana sandwiches made in its kitchen. But what does it really tell us? What stories are embedded in its walls, its furniture, its very existence on that specific plot of land in Memphis? Is Graceland the ultimate symbol of the American dream, or is it a cautionary tale? A testament to family or a monument to loneliness? A celebration of a uniquely American style or a palace of bad taste? Let's look closer. Let's ask some questions about this house on the hill. Number 16, is Graceland a home or a brand? Today, Graceland is not just a house. It is the heart of a massive business enterprise. Elvis Presley Enterprises, the corporate entity that runs the estate, is a powerful commercial force. You don't just visit the mansion anymore. You enter a sprawling complex across the street. There are museums for his cars, his jumpsuits, his gold records. There are restaurants named after his family members. There are gift shops selling every conceivable piece of Elvis branded merchandise. The experience is carefully managed, curated, and monetized. The brand is Elvis. The product is nostalgia, and the headquarters is Graceland. The writer Adam Victor, in his book, The Elvis Encyclopedia, details the vastness of this operation. It's a testament to the business acumen of Priscilla Presley, who took over the estate's management when it was nearly bankrupt after Elvis's death. She opened the house to the public on June 7, 1982. On the first day, 3,000 fans paid the $5 entry fee. Now, the complex has grown to include the 450-room guest house at Graceland Hotel. It's a full-service resort. This transformation from a private residence into a corporate headquarters is perhaps the final, most modern chapter of Graceland's story. The home has become a logo. The personal artifacts have become corporate assets. This shift raises a fundamental question about what visitors are actually experiencing. Are they connecting with the man, Elvis Presley, in his private sanctuary, or are they consuming a carefully constructed brand narrative? The cultural critic Gilbert B. Rodman argues in his book Elvis After Elvis, The Posthumous Career of a Living Legend, that the Graceland experience is a highly controlled one. The tour guides you through the house with an audio guide narrated by John Stamos. You follow a set path, you see what the estate wants you to see, the messier parts of Elvis's life, his prescription drug abuse, his struggles with his weight, his complex relationships are largely absent from the official tour. The brand must be protected. The home is the stage, and the narrative is the script. The very act of preserving the house as it was in 1977 is a business decision. It freezes the brand in time. It prevents the story from changing. But a home is supposed to change. It's supposed to evolve with the people who live in it. It gets redecorated. Furniture gets worn out. Things break. By preserving it perfectly, Graceland stopped being a living home and became a static product. It's less like visiting a person's house and more like walking through a meticulously designed brand installation like a Disney World attraction. The emotional connection people feel is real, but it is a connection facilitated and sold by a corporation. The line between sincere tribute and commercial exploitation is incredibly thin, and at Graceland it might have disappeared altogether. What happens to the meaning of a home when it becomes the central asset of a multi-million-dollar corporation? If Elvis came back today, would he recognize his home, or would he see it as the front for a business he never intended to create? Is the ultimate legacy of Graceland not musical, but commercial? a blueprint for how to monetize a dead celebrity forever. And in our brand-obsessed culture, is this transformation from sacred space to commercial space the most American thing that could have happened to it? Number 15, does Graceland represent the Old South or a new one? So Graceland sits on a piece of land with a history. Before Elvis bought it, the 13.8-acre property was part of a larger farm. The mansion itself, built in 1939, has a colonial revival design. That means it has grand white columns, a symmetrical facade, and a portico. It was designed to look like the plantations of the Old South. This architectural choice is not neutral. It evokes a specific romanticized image of Southern history, a history built on an agrarian economy, a rigid social hierarchy, and the labor of enslaved people. When Elvis, a poor boy from Mississippi, bought a home that looked like a plantation owner's mansion, he was making a powerful statement about his own ascent. But which South was he claiming? The cultural historian W.J. Cash, in his seminal 1941 book, The Mind of the South, described the Southern identity as a complex web of romanticism, pride, and a deep connection to the past. Elvis, in many ways, embodied this. He was polite, called his elders seer and mom, and was deeply devoted to his mother. He loved Southern gospel music and Southern cooking. Graceland, with its grand traditional exterior, seems to fit perfectly into this image of the Old South. It's a symbol of a Southerner who made it big but never forgot where he came from. And yet what happened inside those walls was a symbol of the New South. The interior decor was modern, flashy, and anything but traditional. The famous Jungle Room, with its green shag carpets on the floor and ceiling, its indoor waterfall, and its carved wooden furniture, was the opposite of stately Southern tradition. It was pure 1970s funk, the custom-built racquetball court, the flashy cars in the driveway, the constant parties with his entourage, the Memphis Mafia, all pointed to a new kind of Southern life. One based not on inherited land and old money, but on new money, celebrity, and a global media culture. And Elvis was a pioneer of this new Southern identity. He was a product of the Sun Belt, a region that was rapidly modernizing and integrating into the national economy after World War II. This tension is at the heart of Graceland. The historian James C. Cobb has written extensively about the idea of the New South and how the region has always struggled between its past and its future. Graceland is a physical manifestation of that struggle. The outside of the house represents the aspiration to join the old Southern aristocracy. The inside represents the reality of a new kind of fame and wealth that was tearing down old structures. Elvis was simultaneously a traditional Southern boy and a modern global superstar. His home reflects that duality. It is both a nod to the plantation past and a rejection of its stuffy traditions. It is a monument to a South in transition, caught between what it was and what it was becoming. So is Graceland a final, glorious monument to the romantic ideals of the Old South, a sort of last plantation? Or is it one often of the first artifacts of the New South, a place where new money and global culture crash into old traditions? Can a place be both a symbol of a problematic, mythologized past and a blueprint for a modern commercial future? And when the millions of tourists visit, which South are they looking for? The one of mint juleps and tradition, or the one of rock and roll and rebellion? Number 14 is the house a mirror of Elvis's physical decline. When Elvis Presley bought Graceland in 1957, he was the image of youthful rebellion. He was slim, energetic, and electrifying. The house was his fortress, a place to escape the pressures of his explosive fame. In the early years, the home was a site of energy. There were touch football games on the lawn, roller skating parties in the carport, and all-night music sessions around the piano. The house was alive with the energy of a young man at the peak of his physical and creative powers. The decor was relatively simple at first, reflecting the tastes of his parents, Vernon and Gladys. But as the years went on, both Elvis and the house changed. As Elvis gained weight and became more reclusive, the house also seemed to turn inward. He added the high stone wall around the property in 1957, but the sense of it being a fortress deepened over time. The additions and redecorating projects of the late 1960s and 1970s correspond with a period of personal and physical struggle for Elvis. After his 1968 comeback special, he returned to live performing, a grueling schedule that took a toll on his body. He became increasingly dependent on prescription drugs. This is when the house took on its most famous and eccentric features. The Jungle Room was created in 1974. The Racquetball Building, a massive two-story structure with a lounge and dressing rooms, was completed in 1975, just 2 years before he died. These additions feel less like home improvements and more like attempts to build a self-contained world, a place he would never have to leave. The house became a bubble, insulating him from the outside world. As his physical health declined, he spent more and more time in his upstairs bedroom suite, a space that is not open to the public on the tour. Biographer Peter Guralnick, in his book Careless Love, The Unmaking of Elvis Presley, paints a detailed and tragic picture of these final years, where Elvis's world shrank to the confines of his house and, eventually, his own room. The house, once a symbol of his explosive arrival, became a gilded cage. Its opulence and custom features, like the closed-circuit televisions, were tools for isolation, not connection. The final renovations, particularly the lavish racquetball court, seem almost desperate. It was an attempt to build a space for health and vitality at a time when his own was failing. He reportedly used the court only a handful of times. He died on August 16, 1977, in his bathroom in the private, unseen part of the house. The house, in its final state, is a monument to that decline. It is a place that was constantly being added to, decorated, and filled with objects, perhaps to distract from the emptiness and decay at its center. The vibrant, energetic home of the 1950s had become a bloated, isolated, and ultimately tragic place by 1977, a perfect mirror for its owner. Does the public tour of Graceland, which focuses on the glamour and fun, intentionally hide this darker story of the house as a reflection of decline? If the upstairs private quarters were ever opened, would they tell a completely different, more honest story about Elvis's final years? Can we look at the over-the-top decor of the 1970s, not as kitsch, but as the desperate architecture of addiction and isolation? Is Graceland a beautiful home that contains a sad story, or is the sadness embedded in the very design of the rooms we are allowed to see? In number 13, are we visiting a house or a time capsule? Walking into Graceland is an act of time travel. The house is preserved exactly as it was on the day Elvis died in 1977. The furniture is in the same place, the magazines are on the tables, the kitchen appliances are vintage. The tour is a journey back to a specific moment. This is a deliberate choice by the estate. Nothing is updated, nothing is changed. This preservation creates a powerful sense of nostalgia, not just for Elvis, but for an entire era. For many visitors, it's a way to reconnect with their own past, their youth, or a time they perceive as simpler and better. The French historian Pierre Nora developed the concept of lieux de mémoire, or sites of memory. These are places where memory crystallizes and secretes itself. Graceland is a perfect example of a site of memory. It's not just a historical site, it's a place where a collective cultural memory of Elvis and his time is actively maintained and experienced. The house functions as a trigger. Seeing the white shag carpet in the music room or the 3 television sets in the TV room doesn't just tell you about Elvis, it teleports you to the 1970s. It's a sensory experience. You are not just learning about the past, you are, for a moment, inhabiting it. This time capsule effect is central to Graceland's appeal. The sociologist John Urry, in his work The Tourist Gaze, talks about how tourists are often in search of an authentic experience of another time or place. Graceland offers a highly manufactured yet emotionally powerful form of this authenticity. It feels real, because it is real. Those were his couches, that was his piano. But it is an arrested reality. A home is supposed to be a living thing, changing over time. By freezing it, Graceland becomes something else, an exhibit, an artifact. The decision to preserve the 1977 version of the house is also a choice to tell a specific story. We don't see the Graceland of 1958 or 1965. We see the final version, the version that represents the peak of his interior design eccentricity and the end of his life. This choice frames the entire Elvis narrative around its tragic conclusion. The house is a mausoleum, not just for the man, but for his era. It's a memorial to the 1950s, 60s, and 70s as lived by one person. For the millions of baby boomers who grew up with Elvis, visiting Graceland is a pilgrimage back to the cultural landscape of their own lives. It's a powerful and profitable form of organized nostalgia. But what is lost when a home becomes a time capsule? Does it prevent us from understanding Elvis as a person who grew and changed? By freezing the house in 1977, are we trapping him and our memory of him in the tragic Fat Elvis caricature of his final years? What would we learn if we could see the layers of the house, the different ways it was decorated over 2 decades? Is the Graceland we see the real Graceland, or just one version of it chosen to tell the most dramatic and marketable story? Number 12 was Graceland, a sanctuary or a gilded cage. Elvis Presley bought Graceland for one primary reason: privacy. By 1957, his fame was so immense that he could no longer live a normal life. His home in Memphis on Audubon Drive had become a tourist attraction, with fans constantly gathering outside. Graceland, set back from the road on a large piece of property, was meant to be a refuge. He immediately built the famous stone wall and the musical note gates to create a barrier between his private world and the public world. Inside those walls, he could be himself, surrounded by his family and his trusted friends, the Memphis Mafia. It was a place where Elvis the entertainer could disappear and Elvis the man could emerge. For many years, it served that purpose. It was a private playground. Alana Nash's book, Elvis and the Memphis Mafia, is filled with stories of the fun and games inside the Graceland walls. They had firework battles, rented out the local fairgrounds for private parties, and rode horses and go-karts around the property. Graceland was a compound, a self-sufficient world where the normal rules didn't apply. It was a sanctuary from the crushing demands of being the most famous person on the planet. Here, he was not a product to be sold or an image to be maintained. He was just Elvis, a son, a friend, a man at home. However, over time, the nature of this sanctuary changed. As Elvis's life became more isolated, especially in the 1970s, the refuge began to feel more like a prison. The same walls that kept the public out also kept him in. He created a nocturnal existence, sleeping all day and staying up all night watching movies, eating, and reading. His world shrank. The sanctuary became a gilded cage. He had everything he could possibly want inside those walls: a movie theater, a racquetball court, his own private staff. So there was no need to ever leave. But this comfort came at a cost. Like, it cut him off from the real world. The philosopher Michel Foucault wrote about heterotopia, spaces that are other, that exist outside of normal places. Graceland became a heterotopia. It was a real place, but it operated by its own rules and its own sense of time. This is a common story for the hyper-famous. Michael Jackson's Neverland Ranch is another example. These private worlds are built to provide freedom, but they often end up creating a strange and unhealthy form of captivity. Elvis was the king of his castle, but he was also its prisoner. His final years were spent almost entirely within the confines of the house, a man who could have anything in the world except the simple freedom to walk down the street. The house that was meant to protect him from his fame ultimately became the place where his fame consumed him. Was Elvis aware of this transformation? Did he ever feel that his sanctuary had become a trap? If the walls of Graceland were built for privacy, did they end up creating a profound and deadly loneliness? And is the story of Graceland a universal warning about the nature of celebrity, that the ultimate luxury of fame is the creation of a beautiful prison? Number 11 is Graceland an icon of kitsch or a working class palace? One of the most common reactions to Graceland's interior is that it is tacky or kitsch. The green shag carpet on the jungle room ceiling, the custom-made stained glass peacocks, the bright yellow and white vinyl covered kitchen, the pleated fabric covering the walls of the pool room. To a certain aesthetic sensibility, it's all too much. It's loud, gaudy, and unsophisticated. It has often been held up as the prime example of a celebrity with more money than taste. But this judgment comes from a specific cultural perspective. The French sociologist Pierre Bourdieu, in his book Distinction, a Social Critique of the Judgment of Taste, argued that what we consider good taste is not universal. It is a product of our social class and education. The high culture of the elite values subtlety, minimalism, and an understanding of historical styles. Graceland is a direct rejection of that. It is not subtle. It is not minimalist. It is an explosion of color, texture, and personality. Instead of dismissing it as kitsch, we can see Graceland as a powerful expression of a working class aesthetic. But Elvis grew up in deep poverty in a two-room shotgun shack in Tupelo, Mississippi. For someone from that background, wealth was not something to be hinted at. It was something to be enjoyed, to be displayed, to be lived in. The design of Graceland is not about impressing art critics. It's about comfort, fun, and creating a fantasy environment. It's the ultimate man cave, built by someone who could afford to make any dream a reality. The Jungle Room wasn't an attempt at sophisticated interior design, it was a fun room that reminded him of Hawaii, a place he loved. The bright colors and plush fabrics are about sensory pleasure, not intellectual refinement. Carol Ann Marling, in her book Graceland Going Home with Elvis, makes this argument powerfully. She sees Graceland not as a failure of taste, but as a triumph of personal expression. It is an authentic home. It reflects the personality and background of the person who lived there. It is a working class palace, a place where a poor boy made good and surrounded himself with the things that made him happy without worrying about what the cultural gatekeepers thought. In this view, Graceland is a deeply democratic and American statement. It says that you don't need a fancy education or an upper class background to define your own style and build your own world. The house is a monument to the idea that your taste is your own, and if you have the money, you can make it real. So, is the criticism of Graceland's tackiness just a form of class snobbery? Are we judging the house based on a set of arbitrary rules about good taste that Elvis had no reason to care about? Could Graceland, in its bold and unapologetic style, actually be a more honest and authentic home than the perfectly curated minimalist mansions of today's celebrities? And what does it say about us if we can't see the joy and freedom in a room with a carpet on the ceiling? Number 10. Did the real Elvis Presley ever live there? This seems like a strange question. Of course, Elvis Presley lived at Graceland. He owned it for 20 years, he died there. But the question is about the real Elvis. Was Graceland a place where he could be his authentic self, or was it just another stage where he had to perform? The division between a celebrity's public persona and their private self is a well-known phenomenon. For Elvis, that division was extreme. On stage, he was the king of rock and roll, a larger-than-life, almost mythical figure. Who was he when he walked through the front door of Graceland? Many accounts suggest that even at home, Elvis was rarely just Elvis. He was surrounded by the Memphis Mafia, a group of friends and employees who depended on him for their livelihood. He was the center of their universe, the boss, the provider. This created a dynamic where he was always on. He had to be the entertaining, generous, charismatic leader of the group. The writer Albert Goldman, in his controversial and highly critical biography Elvis, portrays Graceland as a court with a king, where everyone's life revolved around Elvis's moods and whims. In this environment, could he ever truly relax and be vulnerable? Was he ever just a regular person, or was he always performing the role of Elvis at home? The design of the house itself seems to blur the line between private and public, authentic and performed. The downstairs rooms, which are on the public tour, were the semi-public spaces of the house. This is where he entertained guests, played music, and watched TV with his friends. These rooms are grand and designed to impress. The famous upstairs, which remains private, was his personal sanctuary. It contained his bedroom, his office, and his daughter Lisa Marie's room. This was the one place he could truly retreat. The fact that this area is still closed to the public maintains that separation. It preserves the idea that there was a real Elvis that we are not allowed to see. The Graceland we visit is the stage, not the backstage. The philosopher Irving Goffman, in his book The Presentation of Self in Everyday Life, used the metaphor of theatrical performance to describe social interaction. We all have a front stage self that we present to the world, and a backstage self where we can relax and be ourselves. For most people, home is the backstage. For Elvis, it seems Graceland was both. The downstairs was a front stage for his inner circle, while the upstairs was his true backstage. He lived his life on a series of stages, each one a little more private than the next, but perhaps he never truly left the stage entirely. His life was a performance, and Graceland was his most elaborate set. So, when we tour Graceland, are we seeing the home of a man or the set of a life? Did the constant presence of his entourage force him to perform a version of himself even in his own living room? Is the unopened upstairs the key to the whole mystery, the one place where authenticity was possible? Or was the persona of the king so powerful that it followed him everywhere, even into the deepest recesses of his own home, meaning the real Elvis was someone who hadn't existed since before he became famous. Number 9. Why is Graceland a mausoleum for a man who is still alive to so many? Elvis Presley died on August 16, 1977. His body is buried in the meditation garden at Graceland, next to his parents and his grandmother. The grave is the final stop on the tour. It is a quiet, somber place. People leave flowers, teddy bears, and messages. It is, without a doubt, a tomb. The entire house, preserved as it was in 1977, is a monument to a life that has ended. It is a museum of the past, a mausoleum. And yet, for millions of fans, Elvis is not truly dead. The phrase, "Elvis is alive," is a cultural punchline, but it points to a deeper truth. His music is still everywhere. His image is still one of the most recognizable in the world. His cultural influence is still being debated and felt. In a very real sense, he has achieved a kind of cultural immortality. The phenomenon of Elvis impersonators or Elvis tribute artists is a testament to this. Men all over the world dedicate their lives to keeping his persona alive on stage. He lives on through them. Graceland is the center of this strange paradox. It is simultaneously a tomb and a shrine to a living deity. It is a place of mourning and a place of celebration. This duality is at the heart of the Graceland experience, where visitors feel both the sadness of his premature death and the vibrant energy of his life and music. The cultural studies scholar Greil Marcus, in his book Dead Elvis, A Chronicle of a Cultural Obsession, explores this idea of Elvis's afterlife. He argues that Elvis became more powerful and more symbolic in death than he was in the final years of his life. His death removed the complicated, declining man and left only the immortal, iconic image. This process is something the anthropologist Clifford Geertz might call a cultural system. Graceland is the temple at the center of the Elvis religion. The annual Elvis Week in August, which culminates in a candlelight vigil on the anniversary of his death, is a religious pilgrimage. Thousands of devotees gather to pay their respects, to share their stories, and to participate in a collective ritual that keeps his spirit alive. They are not just mourning a dead singer, they are communing with a living cultural force. The house is the physical anchor for this belief. It is the place where the spirit resides. It is proof that he was real, and it is the focal point for his continued existence. Why has Elvis, more than almost any other celebrity, achieved this status of a secular saint? What is it about his story and his home that inspires this level of devotion decades after his death? Is Graceland a place where people go to confront mortality or to deny it? And does the act of preserving his home and visiting his grave somehow prevent him from truly being dead, trapping him in a loop of perpetual performance even after his life has ended? Number 8. Has Graceland become America's secular cathedral? People who visit Graceland often describe the experience in religious terms. They talk about a feeling of peace in the meditation garden. They speak of the tour as a pilgrimage. They leave offerings at his grave. The language used by fans and by Elvis Presley Enterprises itself often has spiritual overtones. Elvis is the king, a title with both royal and divine connotations. Graceland is his shrine. This isn't just a casual metaphor. For many, the connection to Elvis and his home is a deeply spiritual one. Sociologists who study religion, like Emil Durkheim, have talked about the idea of collective effervescence. This is the feeling of energy and harmony that people get when they come together for a shared purpose or belief. You can see this clearly during Elvis Week at Graceland. Thousands of people from all different backgrounds are united by their shared love for Elvis. They sing his songs, share their memories, and participate in rituals like the candlelight vigil. This shared experience creates a powerful sense of community and belonging, much like a religious congregation. Graceland serves as the cathedral for this secular religion. The house itself has all the elements of a sacred site. It has a Holy of Holies, the upstairs, which is off limits to the public, creating a sense of mystery and reverence. It has relics, his jumpsuits, his guitars, his personal effects, which are displayed in museum-like settings for veneration. And it has a tomb, the meditation garden, which is the ultimate destination for the pilgrims. The tour itself is structured like a religious procession, moving from his public life, the downstairs, to his final resting place. Elvis himself was a deeply religious man. He loved gospel music, and it was a huge part of his musical identity. He won 3 Grammy Awards, and all of them were for his gospel recordings. He would often sing gospel songs with his friends late into the night at Graceland. So the spiritual energy that people feel at the house has some basis in the life of the man who lived there. But the worship has shifted from the God that Elvis sang about to Elvis himself. He has become the object of devotion. The cultural critic and author Erica Dose wrote about this phenomenon in her book Elvis Culture Fans, Faith and Image. She documents how fans use Elvis as a figure of hope, inspiration, and even miraculous intervention in their lives, much like a traditional saint. Is it wrong to call this phenomenon a religion? Does it cheapen either traditional faith or the fans' devotion? Or is it simply a new form of spirituality, one built around a cultural icon instead of a divine being? What does the existence of a Church of Elvis tell us about the human need for belief and ritual in a modern secular world? And is Graceland's success a sign that we are increasingly looking for salvation not in the heavens but in our shared popular culture? Number 7. Was Graceland a family home or a stage for domestic life? On the surface, Graceland was all about family. Elvis bought the house so his parents, Vernon and Gladys, could live with him. His beloved mother, Gladys, lived there until her death in 1958, a devastating event for Elvis. Later, his wife Priscilla and their daughter Lisa Marie lived there. The official tour emphasizes this domestic side of Elvis. You see the dining room where they had family meals. You see the living room with family pictures. The narrative presented is one of a man who, despite his immense fame, was a devoted son and a loving father. The home is portrayed as the heart of his family life. However, the reality was much more complicated. The constant presence of the Memphis Mafia and the endless stream of visitors meant that true family privacy was rare. The home was always full of people. It was more like a communal living space or a private club than a typical family home. When Priscilla Presley wrote her memoir, Elvis and Me, she described a life at Graceland that was far from normal. She was brought there as a teenager, and her life was completely controlled by Elvis's schedule and moods. It was a strange, isolated upbringing inside a bubble of fame. The home movies and photographs of Elvis with his family at Graceland often feel like they're being performed for the camera. Like many families, they were creating a record of their happy moments. But for Elvis, the line between private life and public image was always blurry. Was he just being a father and husband, or was he performing the role of Elvis, the family man? The home itself became a set for this performance. The happy domestic scenes that took place there were an important part of his public image, a way to counteract the rebellious, sexualized image of his early career. He needed to be seen as a good, all-American family man, and Graceland was the stage where that image was created. The cultural historian Elaine Tyler May, in her book Homeward Bound American Families in the Cold War Era, described the ideal of the 1950s and 60s family as a private refuge from the anxieties of the world. The suburban home was meant to be a safe, stable, self-contained unit. Graceland looks like that ideal from the outside. But inside, it was anything but a typical suburban home. It was the headquarters of a business, the clubhouse for an entourage, and the site of a very unconventional domestic arrangement. The dream of a normal family life, which Elvis may have genuinely wanted, was perhaps impossible to achieve in the bizarre reality of his existence. Did Graceland ever truly function as a normal family home? Or was it always a performance space? How did the constant presence of an entourage affect the family dynamics between Elvis, Priscilla, and Lisa Marie? Is the wholesome family image presented on the Graceland tour an accurate reflection of reality, or is it a carefully constructed myth designed to make Elvis a more relatable and sympathetic figure? And can any home truly be a private family sanctuary when its owner is public property? Number 6, can we see the ghost of cultural appropriation in Graceland's halls? Graceland is located in Memphis, Tennessee. Memphis is a city with a deep and powerful black cultural history. It is the home of the blues, born on Beale Street. It is the home of Stax Records, which produced some of the greatest soul music ever recorded. Rock and roll itself was born from the fusion of black rhythm and blues with white country music. Elvis Presley, a white man from Mississippi, became the biggest star in the world by performing this historically black music for a white audience. For his home, Graceland is the ultimate symbol of the immense wealth he gained from this process. You cannot understand Graceland without understanding this racial dynamic. The house is a physical monument to a complex and often painful history of cultural appropriation. And Elvis always credited the black artists who influenced him, people like Arthur Big Boy Crudup, who wrote That's All Right, Elvis's first single. But crediting and compensating are two different things. Elvis became a millionaire. Arthur Crudup died in poverty. This story was repeated again and again. Big Mama Thornton recorded Hound Dog in 1952, a raw and powerful blues performance. Elvis's 1956 version was a global smash hit that made him a fortune. Thornton saw very little of that money. Graceland, a grand mansion with a colonial facade, stands in stark contrast to the economic realities of the black musicians whose creativity was the foundation of Elvis's career. The house is, in a sense, built on their uncredited and undercompensated labor. This is not to say that Elvis was a malicious thief. He genuinely loved the music. But he was the beneficiary of a racist system that consistently denied black artists the same opportunities and financial rewards that were available to white artists. As Chuck D of the hip-hop group Public Enemy famously rapped, "Elvis was a hero to most, but he never meant shit to me. You see, it's straight up racist." This sentiment reflects a deep-seated frustration with a system that crowned a white king for a black art form. When you tour Graceland, this context is almost completely absent. The official narrative focuses on Elvis's talent and charisma, but it avoids the difficult questions about race and appropriation. The house itself, with its very white colonial exterior and its almost caricatured exotic jungle room, becomes a metaphor for this process. It's a white structure that contains and profits from a simplified, decontextualized version of another culture. The music that fills the air on the tour is Elvis's music, not the music of the black pioneers who inspired him. The story of rock and roll, as told by Graceland, starts and ends with Elvis. Is it possible to admire Graceland and Elvis's talent while also acknowledging the uncomfortable racial politics that made his success possible? Should the Graceland tour include a more honest and complete history of the music, acknowledging the debt owed to black artists? Does the very existence of Graceland as a shrine to a white rock and roll king perpetuate the erasure of the music's black origins? Or is it simply the home of a man who was a product of his time, a complex figure who both loved black music and profited from an unjust system? Number 5. Is Graceland a monument to having it all or the emptiness of materialism? Graceland is the temple of consumerism. Every room is filled with custom-made furniture, the latest technology of the day, and lavish decorations. Here outside, there are his cars, Cadillacs, a pink one for his mother, a Stutz Blackhawk. In the trophy building, there are his gold and platinum records, a physical representation of his commercial success. The entire estate is a testament to the power of money. It is the ultimate story of a poor boy who made it and bought everything he ever wanted. For many visitors, this is the core of Graceland's appeal. It is a physical manifestation of the American dream. It shows that you can start with nothing and end up with a mansion, a swimming pool, and your own private airplane, the Lisa Marie, which you can also tour. This is a powerful and seductive narrative. It's the story of material success, of having it all. Elvis was famous for his generosity, often buying cars and jewelry for his friends and even for total strangers. This conspicuous consumption was part of his persona. Graceland was his ultimate purchase, the biggest and best symbol of his success. It represents a fantasy of unlimited consumption, the idea that happiness can be bought, and that there is no such thing as too much. The house is a monument to materialism, and for many, it is a beautiful and inspiring one. But there is a darker interpretation. Despite having all this stuff, was Elvis happy? His final years, as documented by many biographers, were marked by loneliness, isolation, poor health, and a deep dependency on prescription drugs. He had everything a person could buy, but he was profoundly unhappy. From this perspective, Graceland looks less like a dream house and more like a cautionary tale. It becomes a symbol of the emptiness of materialism. The endless accumulation of objects did not bring him peace or contentment. The house, filled to the brim with expensive things, was also filled with a deep spiritual void. The writer Erich Fromm, in his book To Have or To Be, argued that modern society is too focused on having, on possessing things, wealth, and status, and not enough on being, on experience, connection, and spiritual growth. Graceland is the ultimate house of having. But it seems that for Elvis, the more he had, the less he was able to simply be. The stuff became a distraction, a way to fill the emptiness, but it was never enough. The story of Graceland can be read as a tragedy of American materialism. It's the story of a man who got everything he thought he wanted and found that it meant nothing. When visitors tour Graceland, which story do they see? Do they see the inspiring tale of a poor boy who achieved the American dream of wealth and success? Or do they see the tragic story of, a man who was consumed by his own possessions, a king trapped in a lonely castle of his own making? Can Graceland be both a monument to the joys of consumption and a stark warning about its limitations? And does our fascination with the house reveal our own conflicted relationship with money and happiness? Number 4, what kind of manhood was built at Graceland? Graceland is a monument to a very specific kind of 20th century American masculinity. It was a man's world. Elvis was the undisputed king of his castle. He lived there with his male entourage, the Memphis Mafia. They were his companions, his bodyguards, and his employees. The house was their clubhouse. They had their own rituals, their own inside jokes, and their own code of conduct. It was a world of cars, guns, karate, and a deep-seated camaraderie. This was a very patriarchal environment. Elvis was the provider and the protector. He made the rules. The women in the house, including his mother, his wife, and the various girlfriends, had to adapt to this male-dominated world. Priscilla Presley's memoir details a life where her identity was completely subsumed by his, and she was expected to be what he wanted her to be, to dress how he wanted her to dress, to, be available when he wanted her to be. This was a model of masculinity that emphasized control, authority, and the separation of male and female spheres. The men were active in the world, the women maintained the home. The design of the house reflects this. It's filled with manly spaces. The TV room in the basement, with its 3 screens and its bar, is a classic man cave. The billiards room, with its fabric-draped walls and ceiling, was a place for male competition and bonding. The racquetball court was the ultimate male playground. Even the famous jungle room has a kind of tiki bar, bachelor pad vibe. These are spaces designed for male leisure and entertainment away from the demands of the outside world. This brand of masculinity was also deeply tied to his Southern identity. The Southern writer W.J. Cash described a Southern ideal of manhood that was based on honor, pride, and a certain swagger. When Elvis embodied this, he was famously polite and chivalrous, but he also had a rebellious streak and a swaggering self-confidence. And he was both a good Southern boy who loved his mama and a powerful man who was in charge of his own world. Graceland was the physical space where he could live out this ideal. It was his kingdom where he was the benevolent but absolute ruler. But was this model of manhood healthy? The intense loyalty of the Memphis Mafia also created an echo chamber, where no one would challenge him or tell him no. This contributed to his isolation and his drug dependency. The patriarchal control he exerted over the women in his life led to the breakdown of his marriage. The pressure to always be the man, the strong provider, the leader of the pack, must have been immense. Graceland was the stage for this performance of masculinity, but it was a demanding and ultimately destructive role. Is Graceland a celebration of a classic, powerful form of American manhood? Or is it a museum of a toxic patriarchal masculinity that we have since tried to move beyond? Can we separate the charming charisma of Elvis's persona from the controlling and unhealthy aspects of his relationships? And what does the enduring appeal of Graceland say about our own culture's ideas about what it means to be a man? Number 3, how does a Tennessee mansion define the modern South? When people think of the American South, they often think of old images, plantations, cotton fields, a slow-paced rural way of life. But that is a South of the past, or a South of myth. The modern South is a place of bustling cities, global commerce, and complex cultural dynamics. And Graceland, in many ways, is a key symbol of this transition. It is a bridge between the Old South and the New South. It was bought by a man who was a product of the Old South, poor, rural, and deeply rooted in Southern traditions of family and religion. But the money he used to buy it came from a brand new cultural force, rock and roll. This music was a product of the modern, urbanizing South. It was born in the cities, like Memphis, where black and white cultures were colliding in new and explosive ways. Elvis took this new Southern sound and broadcast it to the entire world. He was the South's first global superstar, a cultural export on an unprecedented scale. Graceland, therefore, represents a new kind of Southern power. The power of the Old South was based on land and agriculture. The power of the New South, as exemplified by Elvis, is based on culture and media. Graceland is not a plantation house that generated wealth from the land. It is a celebrity mansion that was paid for by record sales, movie tickets, and television appearances. It symbolizes the shift from an agrarian economy to a cultural economy. Today, cities like Nashville, Atlanta, and Memphis are major centers of music, film, and entertainment. Elvis and Graceland were at the vanguard of this transformation. The historian James C. Cobb calls this the selling of the South. He argues that the modern Southern economy is deeply intertwined with the marketing of Southern culture and identity. Graceland is the ultimate example of this. It is a tourist attraction that sells a specific version of Southernness to a global audience. The millions of people who visit Graceland are consuming a product. That product is a romantic, exciting, and ultimately safe version of Southern history and culture, all centered on one charismatic figure. It has become one of the most powerful and recognizable symbols of the South, perhaps even more so than the traditional images of plantations or Confederate monuments. So, how has Graceland shaped the world's perception of the modern South? Has it helped to create a new, more dynamic image for the region, one based on music and pop culture instead of a difficult and divisive history? Or has it created a simplified, commercialized, theme park version of the South that hides the region's ongoing struggles with poverty and race? Is Graceland a symbol of the South's successful integration into the global economy, or a sign that it has sold its soul for tourist dollars? Number 2, does Graceland celebrate upward mobility or mock it? The story of Elvis Presley is the ultimate American rags to riches story. He was born in a 2-room shack in Tupelo, Mississippi, built by his father. His family had no electricity and no indoor plumbing. They were, by any measure, at the bottom of the economic ladder. 20 years later, he bought Graceland, a 10,000 square foot mansion on a sprawling estate. This journey from the shotgun shack to the mansion is a powerful testament to the idea of upward mobility. It's a core part of the American dream, the belief that anyone, no matter how humble their origins, can achieve immense success through talent and hard work. Graceland is the physical proof of this dream. It is the trophy at the end of the journey. Every lavish detail, from the custom-built furniture to the swimming pool, is a symbol of how far he came. For the millions of working-class fans who visited and still visit Graceland, the house is a source of inspiration. It says that their lives, too, can be transformed. Elvis was one of them, a poor boy who made it, and he never forgot where he came from. He filled his house not with the subtle, understated symbols of old money, but with the bold, celebratory things that a working-class person would buy if they suddenly had unlimited funds. The house is a celebration of making it, a loud and proud statement of arrival. But there is another way to read the story. Does the extreme, almost cartoonish opulence of Graceland celebrate upward mobility, or does it, in a way, mock it? The house can be seen as a caricature of what a poor person thinks a rich person's house should look like. It's so over the top that it borders on parody. The jungle room, the shag carpets, the gilded everything. It can be interpreted not as a confident expression of a new kind of wealth, but as an insecure one. An attempt by someone from the outside to imitate and even exaggerate the symbols of success precisely because they don't feel like they truly belong. The concept of new money versus old money is relevant here. Old money is traditionally associated with refined taste, subtlety, and a sense of entitlement. New money is often seen as flashy, gaudy, and desperate to prove its worth. Graceland is the ultimate new money palace. This isn't necessarily a criticism, but it raises the question of what the house truly represents. Is it a successful storming of the gates of the establishment, or is it a separate parallel world created by someone who was never truly accepted by the cultural elite despite his immense wealth and fame? The story of Elvis's career is filled with his attempts to be taken seriously as an actor and an artist, to move beyond the label of a rock and roll singer. Graceland, in its wild excess, might be seen as the home of a man who knew he would always be an outsider. Is Graceland a proud monument to the American dream, a place that proves that anyone can make it? Or is it a tragic symbol of the class anxieties that haunt the newly rich, a home that reveals a deep-seated insecurity beneath its glittering facade? Does the house tell a story of triumph, or a story of what happens when you get everything you want but are never truly allowed to join the club? Number 1, is Graceland a promise or a warning? We come to the final, biggest question. When you stand outside those music gates and look up at that white columned house, what is the ultimate message? What does Graceland symbolize? On one hand, it is a promise. It is the promise of the American dream made real in brick and stone. It says that a poor boy from the most forgotten corner of the country can become a king. It says that talent, hard work, and a little bit of luck can lead to unimaginable success. It promises that you can transcend your circumstances, provide for your family, and build a world of your own. It is a symbol of hope, of possibility, of a life lived on a grand scale. For millions, this is what Graceland means. It is a beautiful promise, a secular shrine to the power of the individual to achieve anything. But on the other hand, Graceland is a warning. It is a warning about the dark side of that same dream. It warns that fame can be a prison, that privacy is a price of success. It warns that wealth cannot buy happiness, and that materialism can leave you empty and alone. It warns that the pressures of maintaining a public image can destroy the private self. It warns that a life without limits can lead to a life cut short. The story of Graceland ends in tragedy. The owner died at 42, a victim of his own success, a prisoner in his own dream house. The final stop on the tour is a gravesite. The promise ends in a tomb. So which is it? Is Graceland a place of inspiration or a cautionary tale? The answer is that it is both. This is what makes it such a powerful and enduring cultural symbol. It contains both sides of the American experience, the dizzying heights of success and the devastating depths of despair. It is a monument to both triumph and tragedy. It embodies the contradictions at the heart of our culture's obsession with fame, wealth, and celebrity. We are drawn to the story of Elvis because it contains everything: the dream, the success, the excess, and the fall. The scholar Joseph Campbell wrote about the hero's journey, a classic story pattern of a hero who goes on an adventure, wins a victory, and comes home transformed. Elvis's life is a modern American version of this myth. Graceland is the home he comes back to, the castle he wins. But in this version of the story, the hero doesn't live happily ever after. The castle becomes his prison, and the story ends in tragedy. Graceland is the monument to this flawed, tragic, and deeply American myth. It is both the promise and the price. What does it mean that one of America's most beloved landmarks tells such a deeply ambivalent story? Are we, as visitors and as a culture, more drawn to the promise or to the warning? Does the glamour of Graceland make us forget the tragedy, or does the tragedy make the glamour seem all the more poignant? And ultimately, as we walk away from the house on the hill, are we left with a feeling of hope for what we can achieve, or a sense of fear for what we might lose along the way?